Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 bringing to you yet another awesome yet crazy theory, and this is a follow-up to the first one that I did where I talked about my theory on how I would introduce Mr. Freeze into the Batman sequel. So this is part 2, and this time I am going to be talking about my theory on how I would introduce the Mad Hatter for the Batman sequel. So before we get started, we're just going to have a quick brief look at the media history of the Mad Hatter, and then after that we'll talk about how I would introduce the Mad Hatter for Matt Reeves' sequel of The Batman. Ever since making his debut in Batman issue 49 in 1948, the Mad Hatter has been one of the most consistent villains in Batman's rogues gallery, and in his early years he was always portrayed as more of a comedic and light-hearted villain for the Dark Knight. However, in recent years the Mad Hatter has become a much more darker and creepier and more sinister opponent for the Dark Knight. And even in the media, the Mad Hatter was initially always played up for laughs, and he was one of the more sillier Batman villains in animation. But it wasn't until the 1990s that the Mad Hatter was completely rethought from the ground up and made into a much more serious threat for Batman. And at times he would come across as a lot more scarier than what he was in his early years. And he's made a number of appearances in the media, from animation to a number of video game appearances in the Arkham games, where the Mad Hatter was more or less played as kind of like a nocturnal villain. And in live action he made an appearance in Batman 66, and of course recently he appeared in the TV series Gotham. So for today I am going to be coming up with a theory on how I would introduce the Mad Hatter as the main villain for the Batman sequel. And I'll also be taking some inspiration from one of my good buddies, Chris, who you know as Geeker Beyond, who came up with a very cool idea involving the Mad Hatter. So I'm going to apply that to this theory. So this theory video is dedicated to him. So how I would introduce the Mad Hatter into a sequel for the Batman is I would have the Mad Hatter as a murderer, of course, and he would go around killing different ladies who were named Alice, because he's on the search for his Alice, as in Alice in Wonderland. So he would commit these crimes that are related to the Alice in Wonderland books. So Batman would be brought in by Jim Gordon to try and solve the mystery of who this person is going around killing all these different ladies who are named Alice. And I would have the Mad Hatter as Jervis Tetch, so that would remain the same. I would have him working at Wayne Enterprises, just like in the DCAU, and he would become obsessed with a lady working at Wayne Enterprises whose name is actually Alice and looks exactly like the girl in the books. So he would go on this murderous obsession with Alice, trying everything he can to win her over, and he would look at Batman as kind of like this dark evil threat trying to take his beloved Alice away from him. Now obviously this lady isn't the real Alice. I would eventually have the Mad Hatter find his Alice, who's actually Alice that we know from the comic books and the one that appeared in Batwoman. So I would eventually have that Alice hook up with the Mad Hatter, so we could have that Alice searching for her best friend, Mr. Hatter, so to speak. So Batman would try to rescue Alice from being murdered by the Mad Hatter, and in turn the other Alice would get involved and also hook up with the Mad Hatter, and the two of them would try to take down Batman. So that's kind of how I would introduce the Mad Hatter into the Batman sequel. He would go around killing different ladies while on a quest to try and find his Alice, and eventually he does find Alice, but you know, it's not the Alice that he knows. And then, as I mentioned already, the villain Alice would actually emerge, and then the two of them would join forces and just cause complete chaos all around Gotham. Now obviously we have no confirmation as to who is going to be the main villain for the Batman sequel, but if I was going to introduce a villain for the Batman sequel, it would be the Mad Hatter, because it's something that we have never seen before in live action in terms of the movies, and I think the Mad Hatter would be a great challenge for Batman, and it would be something new as well. And also I would have the Batman sequel make it more of an Alice in Wonderland theme, so maybe Batman could try and rescue this lady named Alice in the Alice in Wonderland fun fair, so maybe you could have that set around the entire movie in the Alice in Wonderland fun fair. But we'll just have to see really, but that's how I would do it really. I would introduce the Mad Hatter as the main villain, going around killing different ladies who are named Alice while in search of his Alice, and he eventually hooks up with the Alice villain, and then they try to take down Batman together. And that's pretty much my theory on how I would introduce the Mad Hatter for the Batman sequel. Now obviously if the Mad Hatter is given the green light and he is the main villain for the Batman sequel, I fully expect it to be something completely different, but it would be cool if they did something like what I came up with. But we'll just have to see really. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. How would you bring the Mad Hatter into the Batman sequel? Would you do it like this, or would you do it in a different way? Would you do it in the exact same way they did it in Batman the Animated Series? Or would you take inspiration from the Arkham games? You know what to do guys, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another awesome yet crazy theory. So until then, take care everybody and stay safe, and once again as always much appreciated. Thanks for listening.